It was a freezing December morning in the year 1900 when the supply ship Hesperus battled through biting winds and towering waves toward the Flannan Isles, a cluster of small, jagged rocks lost in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, just off the northwest coast of Scotland. For weeks, no signal had come from the lighthouse keepers stationed there. The light, which should have been visible for miles across the dark sea, had gone completely dark. Ships passing by reported no guiding beam, only darkness and the distant crash of waves. On board the Hesperus were the relief crew and the lighthouse superintendent, Captain Harvey, all expecting to see the three keepers waiting on the landing platform, ready to greet them. The keepers had been isolated there for nearly a month. James Duckett, the head keeper, Thomas Marshall, his assistant, and Donald MacArthur, a replacement keeper, covering for another man on leave. As the Hesperus approached the island, a thick mist rolled across the cliffs, and the waves struck the rocks with deafening force. But what unsettled the crew the most was not the storm. It was the stillness of the lighthouse. The tower stood tall and pale against the gray sky, completely lifeless. No smoke rose from the chimney, no movement was seen at the windows, and most haunting of all, the great lamp at the top was dark and cold. Captain Harvey ordered the ship's horn to be blown, once, twice, 3 times, the deep sound echoing across the cliffs and fading into silence. No reply. He fired a flare high into the air. Still nothing. Not a single figure appeared on the landing or along the pathway to the lighthouse. Something was terribly wrong. Finally, the captain sent one of the men, Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, ashore to investigate. Moore was a seasoned man, not easily frightened, but as he later wrote, he felt a strange chill run through him as soon as he stepped onto the island. The path to the lighthouse was steep, slippery, and eerily quiet. The wind moaned through cracks in the rocks, and seabirds circled overhead, their cries echoing through the emptiness. When Moore reached the front gate, he noticed it was closed, but not locked. He climbed the steps and knocked on the door. No answer. He pushed it open, and what he saw inside froze him in place. Everything looked normal, and yet not normal at all. The clock on the wall had stopped. The beds were neatly made. Oilskins belonging to 2 of the men were missing, but one set still hung on its hook. On the dining table, there were half-eaten meals, cold and untouched, a slice of bread, a piece of meat, and a cup left half full. A chair was knocked over, lying on its side, as if someone had risen in a hurry and never come back. He called out their names, Duckett, Marshall, MacArthur, but only the sound of the wind answered. The lighthouse was silent, except for the faint creak of the wooden floorboards beneath his boots. When he climbed the spiral staircase to the top of the tower, the lamp's glass was polished, the wicks trimmed, everything was in perfect order. It looked as if the keepers had been doing their duties right up until the moment they disappeared. He returned to the ship, shaken and pale, and reported what he had found. The captain immediately sent more men ashore to search every corner of the island, the cliffs, the shore, the caves, everywhere a man could possibly be. But there was no sign of them, no footprints, no bodies, no personal belongings missing, just the endless ocean crashing below. On the west side of the island, however, they did find something disturbing. The iron railings near the edge of the landing were bent and twisted as though struck by enormous force. A heavy storage box had been smashed open, and pieces of rope were scattered across the rocks. It looked as if a violent storm had struck that area recently. Yet, according to weather records, there had been no storm during those days strong enough to cause such damage. The men returned to the lighthouse as the evening fell, the dark waves roaring below them. The light was turned back on for the first time in weeks, its beams slicing through the mist once more. But the three keepers who had tended it so faithfully were gone forever. It was as if the sea itself had swallowed them whole. When the Hesperus finally sailed back to the mainland, carrying the grim news, the story spread quickly across Scotland and beyond. People whispered of curses, ghosts, and supernatural forces. Newspapers called it the mystery of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse. 3 men, trapped on a lonely island, vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but silence, an unfinished meal, and a mystery that would haunt the world for more than a century. Before we dive deeper into this chilling mystery, we need to understand who these men really were, the ones who kept the light burning against the wild Atlantic winds. These were not ordinary men. They were keepers of the light. Individuals who lived lives of isolation, discipline, and quiet courage. James Ducat, the principal keeper, was a man of calm strength. In his 40s, with years of experience behind him, Ducat was known among his peers for being steady, dependable, and deeply serious about his duty. He had served in multiple lighthouses before, and his record was spotless. Fellow sailors said that if anyone could keep calm in a storm, it was Ducat. He rarely spoke much, but when he did, his words carried authority. Thomas Marshall, the assistant keeper, was younger, only in his 20s, but equally committed. He was practical, hard-working, and respectful toward Ducat, almost like a younger brother learning from an elder. Marshall had a reputation for being meticulous, always checking the equipment twice, making sure the lamps were perfectly polished, the fuel topped up, and the logs written neatly. He wanted to learn, to rise through the ranks, and become a principal keeper one day. And then there was Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper who had been sent to replace another man on leave. MacArthur was different, not a professional keeper, but a former soldier, known for his temper and toughness. Locals called him the Brawler because of his short fuse, but they also said he had a good heart. He was the kind of man who would never abandon a comrade in danger. Together, these 3 men formed the team assigned to one of the most remote and dangerous outposts in all of Scotland, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse. The lighthouse itself stood on Elan Moor, the largest of the Flannan Isles, a cluster of rocky islands battered day and night by crashing waves and screaming winds. There were no trees, no shelter, and no permanent inhabitants, just grass, stone, and the endless sea stretching in every direction. Imagine living there. No phones, no radios, no boats except for the rare supply ship that came once or twice a month if the weather allowed. Sometimes storms were so fierce that weeks would pass before anyone could reach them. In those times, the men were completely cut off from the rest of the world. Their daily life was strict, almost ritualistic. Each day was divided into duties: cleaning the lamp's glass, checking the oil, winding the mechanism, recording weather changes, maintaining the machinery, and keeping logs of every small event. They also cooked their own meals, cleaned the quarters, and made small repairs around the island. At sunset, one of them would climb the spiral staircase to light the massive lamp, a powerful beam that guided sailors through the treacherous waters. Once the lamp was lit, it had to keep burning all night long, no matter how bad the storm outside. To the world, these men were unseen heroes, guardians who stood watch while everyone else slept. Ships far out at sea depended on that light to survive. A single mistake, A moment of carelessness could mean disaster, and they knew it. But behind that dedication was also a heavy price: loneliness. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with only the same two faces to talk to, the same gray horizon, and the same howling winds. Many lighthouse keepers over the years had suffered from what they called the lighthouse sickness, a kind of creeping madness caused by isolation, sleepless nights, and the constant roar of the sea. Yet Duckett, Marshall, and MacArthur seemed to handle it well. Their logbook entries before December 1900 showed discipline and normalcy: routine weather notes, maintenance tasks, and light reports. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. They were doing their jobs, keeping the light burning, fulfilling their duty as they always had. But what none of them knew was that this would be their final posting. Within days, all three would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only their journals, their tools, and a mystery that would outlive them by more than a century. It's strange to think, men so disciplined, so cautious, so trained to handle danger, could disappear so completely. No bodies, no cries for help, no signs of struggle. Just three keepers, gone from an island, surrounded by nothing but water and wind. And that's what makes this story so haunting. The kind of mystery that makes you wonder, did they face something human or something far beyond our understanding? Because the deeper we look into their final days, the more chilling the clues become. The mystery deepens when we turn the fragile pages of the lighthouse logbook, the only silent witness left behind on that lonely island. Inside those pages were the final words ever written by the keepers of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse. Ordinary notes about wind and weather slowly transformed into something darker, something almost haunting. It all began on December 12th, 1900. Assistant keeper Thomas Marshall wrote, "Severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He described the sea as violent and dangerous, with roaring gusts battering the walls of the lighthouse. The waves, he said, rose higher than ever before, and the wind howled like a living creature. But here's the strange thing. No such storm was recorded on the mainland. The weather elsewhere in Scotland had been calm. Only on the Flannan Isles, it seemed, the sea had turned wild. What had they seen out there in that dark, stormy night? The following day, December 13th, the tone of the entries changed. Marshall noted that James Ducat, the principal keeper, was very quiet, while Donald MacArthur, the tough ex-soldier, was crying. That single word, crying, chills readers even today. MacArthur was known for his temper and bravery. He'd fought in battles, faced danger without fear. What could have shaken him so badly that he was reduced to tears on that isolated island? Marshall's entry didn't explain. It only recorded the fact, leaving behind a question that would never be answered. Then came December 14th. The log described that the storm was still raging. The three men had prayed together, the entry said. They couldn't light the lamp that night, something almost unthinkable for keepers. The storm was too fierce, the sea too wild. It must have been terrifying, the waves crashing against the rocks, the whole tower trembling, and no way to call for help. And finally, the last entry, December 15th, 1900. Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. Those were the final words ever written in the Flannan Isles logbook.
After that, nothing. No notes, no updates, no sign of life. When investigators finally arrived days later, they pieced together what little evidence remained. Inside the lighthouse, everything looked almost normal, except for one chilling detail. One of the men's oilskins, the heavy waterproof coat, still hung neatly on its peg. That meant whoever left the lighthouse last went out without protection, in freezing December weather, on cliffs soaked with rain and spray. Outside, the western landing, the area facing the full fury of the Atlantic, showed clear signs of chaos. Iron railings were bent and twisted, as if something immense had struck them. A heavy storage box had been smashed open, its contents scattered. Pieces of rope were tangled and torn, and the turf around the cliff's edge was ripped away. It looked like a powerful wave had hit the island, perhaps a rogue wave, one of those unpredictable walls of water that rise from nowhere and crash with unimaginable force. But if that were true, why were all three men outside? Lighthouse protocol was strict. During bad weather, at least one keeper had to remain inside the tower at all times. They never all left together, especially not during a storm. For all three men to be outside meant something truly urgent had drawn them there. Maybe one man went out to secure equipment in the gale. The second might have gone to help him. The third, perhaps MacArthur, without his coat, rushed out in panic when the others didn't return. Then, in one terrible instant, a wave could have swept them all away. But still, doubts linger. The log entries themselves feel strange, almost too dramatic, too emotional. Some historians even question whether they were real or later inventions meant to add mystery to the story. And there's another eerie detail. Reports from nearby ships that week never mentioned violent storms. Could it be that the men imagined the storm or experienced something that no one else could see? Whatever the truth, the last written words, "God is over all," feel like a message, a final surrender, as if they knew something was coming, something beyond their control. Standing in that silent lighthouse, investigators could almost feel their presence. Three men who had faced something unspeakable, their fear still echoing in the walls. What truly happened between those final entries and the moment they vanished remains the heart of the mystery. A storm that shouldn't have existed, tears from a man who never cried, and words of faith written before disappearing forever. The logbook closed, and with it the final chapter of the keepers' lives, but not the mystery that would continue to haunt generations to come. As news of the disappearance spread across Scotland, curiosity quickly turned into obsession. Everyone, from sailors and priests to newspaper reporters, wanted to know what had happened on that lonely island.
Rumors swirled like the stormy waves that surrounded the lighthouse. The facts were few, but the theories were endless. Some were practical, others terrifying. And even now, more than a century later, no one truly knows which one is true. The most widely accepted theory, and the one written in the official report, claims that a massive rogue wave struck the island. It's believed that during one of the fierce December storms, the men noticed damage or loose equipment near the western landing, ropes or supply boxes at risk of being swept into the sea. Perhaps Duguet and Marshall went out first to secure them. When they didn't return, MacArthur, worried for his colleagues, rushed out to help, without even stopping to grab his oilskin coat. Then, without warning, a colossal wall of water, one of those freak waves that rise from nowhere, crashed over the rocks with devastating force. In an instant, all three men were gone, dragged into the dark sea before they could even cry out. It sounds convincing, until you remember the details. The door to the lighthouse was closed and locked. Chairs inside were upright, and their meal had been left neatly on the table. These men were trained professionals. Would all three really have abandoned their post together, leaving the light unattended? It didn't fit their disciplined nature. Another theory whispers of madness and violence. Life on the Flannan Isles was harsh. Days of isolation, roaring winds, and endless silence. Three men trapped together in a stone tower, cut off from the world, can easily grow restless, even paranoid. Some believe that arguments began to brew between them, maybe over work, food, or the endless stress of storms and loneliness. The tension built until it exploded. Perhaps one man struck another, sending him falling to his death on the rocks below. Panic followed, and in a desperate attempt to save or cover up the accident, the others went outside, only to be lost as well. It's a dark and dramatic idea, but investigators found no signs of struggle inside the lighthouse. No broken furniture, no blood, no chaos. Everything was strangely calm. It looked less like a scene of violence and more like one frozen in time. And then come the stories that send shivers down the spine. Long before the lighthouse was built, the Flannan Isles were steeped in ancient superstition. Locals spoke of ghostly shapes dancing on the cliffs, of strange lights flickering over the water at night. Fishermen avoided the area, believing the islands were cursed, home to restless spirits or the voices of drowned sailors. Some say the keepers saw something that December, a glowing light hovering over the sea, an eerie sound calling their names through the wind. In fear or trance, they left the safety of the lighthouse, drawn towards something they couldn't resist. Even decades later, sailors passing the island swore they heard faint cries on the wind or saw figures moving near the lighthouse when no one was stationed there. The final words in the logbook, "God is over all," only deepened the belief that something unearthly might have been involved. Yet perhaps the simplest explanation is also the most tragic. The sea itself claimed them. For all their experience, the ocean around the Flannan Isles was unpredictable and cruel. A single misstep on wet stone could mean death. It's possible that one man slipped, another went to help, and the third followed, a chain reaction of tragedy. The waves were merciless, the wind deafening. No one would have heard their cries, and the sea would have swallowed every trace of them within seconds. Their bodies were never recovered, perhaps tangled in kelp, perhaps pulled far out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's a haunting thought, but one that nature alone could explain. Yet, none of these theories completely fit. The mystery remains too perfect, too eerie. The bodies were never found, the door was closed, the clock had stopped, and their belongings were untouched, as if they had stepped outside only for a moment and simply vanished into thin air. Some mysteries fade with time, but the Flannan Isle Lighthouse remains one of those few that only grow darker the more we try to understand them. More than a century later, people still wonder, was it the sea, the storm, or something the human mind cannot explain? After the mysterious disappearance of the three keepers, life on the Flannan Isles could never truly return to normal. The Northern Lighthouse Board quickly sent new men to take over the duties, brave souls who knew the story, but swore not to let fear get in the way of their work. The light, after all, had to keep burning. Ships depended on it. Lives depended on it. But from the moment they stepped foot on the island, the new keepers felt something different, something they couldn't quite explain. They spoke of unsettling noises in the night, tools clinking when no one was in the workshop, or doors that slowly creaked open as if pushed by an invisible hand, and footsteps echoing in the stone corridors long after everyone had gone to bed. One man said he woke up to the sound of someone whispering his name, but when he turned, the room was empty. Another claimed he saw a shadowy figure standing at the cliff's edge, staring out at the sea, only for it to vanish when he called out. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the wind howled across the island, they could swear they heard faint cries carried on the breeze, voices calling from the direction of the rocks below. It was said that even the light itself flickered without reason, glowing dimmer and brighter as if responding to unseen presences. The stories spread quickly among the lighthouse community. Men who had once laughed at superstition refused to work there. Others asked for transfers after only a few weeks on duty. It was as if the island itself wanted to be left alone, guarding its secret beneath the waves. For years afterward, the lighthouse continued to operate with new crews rotating in and out, each one adding new whispers to the legend. The Flannan Isles became known not only for their beauty, but for the fear that lingered in their mist. Then, in the 1970s, the lighthouse was finally automated. No more keepers, no more lonely nights. For many, it was a relief. Technology would do what humans once had to risk their lives for. The doors were locked for good, and the island was left to the seabirds and the wind. But even then, the stories didn't stop. Fishermen passing by late at night sometimes claimed they saw 3 figures moving near the lighthouse, faint and gray, like mist taking human shape. Others said they saw the light turn on and off, even when the system was deactivated for maintenance. Some swore they heard cries carried across the water, fading in and out with the waves. To this day, sailors who travel near the Flannan Isles say that on stormy nights, if you listen closely, you can hear a man's voice calling from the cliffs, desperate, echoing, and full of sorrow. Maybe it's just the wind. Maybe it's something else. No one truly knows what happened to James Duquette, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. The official report said they were victims of the sea. Others believe they were victims of something far more mysterious, a force that has never been explained. All we know is that on that lonely rock, surrounded by the endless roar of the Atlantic, 3 men vanished, leaving behind a legend that refuses to fade. Even after more than a century, people still capture imaginations, haunting every sailor, historian, and storyteller who dares to look into the mystery. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands today, its beams slicing through the fog, silent, steady, eternal. The light continues to shine, but the keepers who once tended it remain lost to history. Perhaps the island holds its secret beneath the sea, where only the waves can whisper the truth. Or perhaps, on certain nights when the wind blows just right, their spirits still walk the cliffs, keeping watch over the light they once guarded with their lives.